One of the main challenges nowadays is that there's a lot of talk about digitalization and people talk about advanced things like digital twins. But I think there is a big gap still between what is actually implemented and what people talk about. Because the implementation itself shows to be much more complicated than people expect. It's just challenging to go from an environment where not so much is available online to move to an environment where data are available in the cloud, where everything is suddenly available, where you can work with data, and then just find ways to make good use of that. I also think that one of the challenges at large scale is that the set of measurement data that you have available is rather limited. And people have to learn to accept this because it's no use to develop a very advanced control strategy which relies on some exotic measurements, which works in the lab.
Welcome back to the Smart Biotech Scientist. I'm David Brühlmann, and we are continuing our fascinating conversation with Krist Gernaey, who is a professor in Industrial Fermentation Technology at the Department of Chemical and Biochemical Engineering at the Technical University of Denmark, about bioreactor modeling and online sensors. In this second part, we'll explore digital twins, real-time control strategies, and how Industry 4.0 technologies are transforming bioprocessing. Krist offers unique insights on bridging academic innovation with industrial implementation. Ready to elevate your bioprocessing expertise? Let's dive in. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. As you're still developing this, what is your outlook in the future? Like, how would that integrate into a PAT system and into a digital twin? How are you going to go about this?
Yeah, at the moment we are very much focused on making the device work, but the idea is that, let's say in a couple of years, we would be able to measure, let's now take lactate or glucose as an example, and then directly use the signal as an input to a control strategy. So for example, try to use this directly as a signal that can be used to adapt the feeding rate of a bioreactor. If we now talk, for example, about fed batch operation. Because nowadays, if you talk about fed batch operation in an aerobic system, then what is typically done is that you use the oxygen consumption rate as an indication for how fast your carbon source is converted, but you don't really measure it. You assume that your oxygen consumption is directly related to carbon source conversion, but you don't really measure your carbon source concentration. So if you can measure it directly, so for example, glucose, let's now say, then you have a better system, an improved possibility to achieve a proper control or tight control of your feeding strategy. I'm not saying that you will certainly have a process that will make much more money, but I think it's also important that you can use these better data to actually document how your process has been operating. Because now we document operation at full scale based on some offline data which are collected once in a while. I think it would be nice to be able to demonstrate also as an additional benefit that your process has all the time been, for example, at this in this concentration band if we look at substrates, for example. So I think in a PAT context, I think you can also have better documentation to prove that your process has been operated properly.
Yes, you will definitely have better documentation. And for my experience also, if you have the proper models and the proper PAT system in place, you can also make better decisions to make sure that your bioreactor run or your downstream like purification is operating in the range you really have it intended for.
Yeah, if we talk about fat batch, then I think better data can also be helpful in deciding when should we stop the process. Because if you can gain a couple of hours each fermentation, that also releases additional production capacity.
We talked about digital twin, but can you give us maybe the 2-minute definition of a digital twin? Because there's a lot of hype out there. A lot of people speak about a digital twin, but what is actually a digital twin?
For me, a digital twin is, first of all, a digital copy of a real system. But what really makes it a digital twin is the fact that you have two-way communication between the real system, which sends data to the digital twin, and then the digital twin that sends information back to the plant. So in fact, if you ask me, then digital twin is very similar to approaches like model predictive control, where you also have a model or a system which receives data. You try to run simulations to find out where to go with your system in terms of set points, and then you send the updated set points back to your system.
How close are we actually to having a truly predictive model or truly predictive system?
I would think never close enough. I think as a modeler, it's very important at some point to decide, okay, but now it's enough. We have to accept that we will not get any closer to getting proper predictions. And then you have to decide, okay, but with the quality of the predictions that we get, what can we get out of it? Because you can keep on improving and improving your model endlessly. But you need to accept at some point that this is the quality of predictions that you can get. And then you need to decide, find out what can we do with this practically. And it can also be disappointing. It can also be that the conclusion is, okay, but this is maybe not good enough to base a control strategy on it. But then you have to be honest and admit it instead of trying to pretend, trying to continue to try to develop on things which will not work out in the end. But that's very difficult to see, I think.
Yeah, and I would also like to have your take on that, because modeling definitely has an advantage. It's definitely a game changer. But the question is also, when does it make sense to have a huge layer of modeling, and how early should you do that, especially if you're a company that doesn't have a lot of resources? It's always a trade-off of how much modeling you need and you would like to have. Do you have any ideas or any advice on that for people who are asking how much they should do?
Yeah, to my opinion, if you start thinking about very complicated things like digital twin, then that's the last thing to do. If you have data available, then first it's maybe important to try to do simple things. Like, for example, try to compare how do my data look like when I take the same fermentation process, for example, operated at different locations, different production sites. This can very easily be done nowadays, especially I think also because industry has not only adopted Excel, but also is more and more moving towards using Python-based tools, which give a lot of extra functionality. But basically, the first thing you can do is you can compare performance of different production sites and try to pinpoint why there are potentially differences between different production sites. And that, I think, is an easy way to get some advantage from the collected data. So this is no rocket science. Then I think in the second place, it's useful to try to look at individual measurements, maybe also add some simple measurements that could keep an eye on your equipment. So we talk about techniques like predictive maintenance, which can help you to predict when your equipment is close to a breakdown. And this is a very nice way to optimize your system, because you can potentially avoid that some batches go lost. And then in the end, then I think it's maybe time to do the complicated things. Then you could start thinking about working with advanced models, working with digital twins. And even there, I think you can distinguish between a situation where you apply this digital twin for a unit operation, and then what maybe many people dream about, try to apply it for a whole plant. But that's so complicated, I wouldn't start with that, because you will only get frustrated. I think it's important to accept that you have to do things stepwise. And that's also related to the fact that along with such a development, you also need to build up capacity. You need to, in terms of making people develop skills to be able to work with these models. Otherwise, you might risk to end up in a situation where somebody has implemented something which is rather complicated, but you don't have anybody left to operate it. So there needs to be a match between what you develop in terms of complexity and the capacity that you have for the people that have to run these systems.
And what are some pitfalls we have to watch out for as we're doing that?
Well, as I said before, there are these different modeling approaches, and I think one of the pitfalls, is to believe that everything will be solved with purely data-driven models. I especially like this hybrid approach where you combine a mechanistic aspect with a hybrid aspect, and in this way you get a model which is not too complex but can adapt to some changes in your system. I actually think that hybrid modeling is one of the most promising approaches in terms of developing digital twins. not the purely mechanistic approach, not the purely data-driven one, but a hybrid approach. So I would put my efforts in developing such models. Then I think also one of the pitfalls is to expect that modeling digital twins will give you a tremendous benefit. It will not give you a tremendous benefit. It will give you some benefit. And the benefit is, I think, not to be considered in terms of improved yields or improved performance of your process. Well, maybe you can squeeze out a few percent extra, but the benefit is more also that you have a better understanding of your process and you have better documentation of what you've been doing. Because I think many processes are already optimized quite far. And it's difficult to squeeze out a couple of extra percent in many cases.
Now, in the last part of our conversation, I'd like to zoom out a bit and focus on your activities at the intersection of academia and industry. You have different roles. You're a chairman, you're a co-founder, you're doing a lot of different things. Well, can you tell us a bit how you are facilitating the implementation of advanced modeling and sensor technologies from academia to industry?
Yeah, I can try. So there are different ways to work together with industry. On the one hand, what I observe is that many of our former PhD students which have done a project related to modeling, when they come in industry, they often come into a position where they also try to implement models in the industrial context they are now working in. It could be, for example, improved use of spectroscopy in downstream processing, where I think spectroscopy is very relevant and easier to use than in fermentation. Then other ways in which we can support industry is, I think, to offer our experience through, for example, postgraduate education. I mean, there is, I think, quite a big demand for people to learn something about how to set up a model, just to learn simply how can you do things in Python. And there, I think we, as academia, we have a task to help industry to make progress. What I also see is that there are many startup companies which actually try to make a living from using advanced modeling techniques or using modeling techniques and applying them to data for their customers. That, I think, is also a very good combination, because I don't think there are many larger companies which actually have a size which justifies that you develop a separate modeling department. So I think it's a matter of making good partnerships there also.
And looking at these technologies, and what do you think is the most critical aspect we should look out for as we are transferring a promising technology from academia into industry, whether it's spinning out, for instance, as a company, or sometimes, as you said, establishing a partnership, or it can also be by selling the technology to someone?
One of the most important things is to try not to oversell things. So try to keep things down to planet Earth, because there's always a danger that if you work with advanced models and are confronted with a potential customer that does not know so much about this, then you need to come down at a level where you can convey a message which is understandable. That's important, I think, for the customer to accept what you are trying to implement or try to sell to a potential customer. I mean, we can take computational fluid dynamics as an example. It's a very useful technique, and I think it can give some very useful information at large scale. But I think if you want to come across with such a CFD modeling project to a potential customer, then you also have to inform about the limitations of this approach. And there, one of the main limitations of the approach is that, well, it's very seldom that we have a proper validation of these computational fluid dynamics models, simply because it's so difficult to collect proper data at large scale.
And now, as you look forward, let's say 5 to 10 years from now, obviously a lot will happen with all the new technology, with PAT, with digital twins, with new machine learning approaches, with AI, and a lot more. What is your vision of integrated data-driven bioprocessing in the future?
There's this vision or this dream of that everything will be modular, so where you can easily combine different tools. But that, I think, requires that as a company that wants to work with these approaches, it requires that you are quite strategic, that you plan in advance what is the path I want to take, instead of just developing a bit here, developing a bit there. If you just do these incremental changes without having an overall vision, then you end up with something that starts looking like a cauliflower, I think. There's something growing here, there's something growing there, but in the end you might create something which is so complicated that it's difficult to work with. So it's important to try to have a kind of a vision on how could things evolve on the long term. And maybe you need to take some difficult decisions and say, okay, this here is potentially very useful, but it doesn't fit into our strategy.
So keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, because in the end, we try to develop tools which should make life easier for people. It shouldn't make life more complicated. And if we manage to do that, if we manage to use models to make life easier for people, then I'm very happy. Then maybe I can retire.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the purpose, to make it easier, because modeling is great, but it has also the tendency to overcomplicate things. So I think definitely you're making a good point here.
But it's also the nature of many scientists. I mean, we like what we do, we are proud of what we do, but then it might end up also that we try to make things more complicated because we couldn't just do this extra output that we can generate or just add another phenomenon to our model. But you have to be very sharp and say at some point, okay, I could, and that's it.
Krist, we have covered a lot of ground today. What is the most important takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important takeaway, there's a couple of things. First of all, you should be open. That means that you should be open for all kind of potential approaches that can help you to improve your process. And then in the end, also another important thing is you should work as a team. And then as a team, take a decision, what is the best for my process. And then the third thing that I would like to say is always when you work on modeling projects, try to keep user friendliness as the main focus point. So as we said already before, the model should be there to help people, not to make life more complicated for people. If you manage to do that, then I think you have a good selling point also towards management to be able to come further with modeling.
Thank you very much, Krist, for sharing your expertise, your critical thoughts about the status or the state of the industry and what modeling and PAT and digital twins can do. As we're wrapping up, where can people get a hold of you?
I would say here in my office, but that's of course complicated when you're not in Denmark. But normally people can contact me by email or they can contact me via my LinkedIn profile. So you can send me a message on LinkedIn and usually I reply quite fast there.
Excellent, smart biotech scientist. Here you have it. I will put these links in the show notes. So please reach out to Krist. And Krist, once again, thank you very much for being on the show today. It has been a huge pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was fun.
And that concludes our discussion with Krist Gernaey. His insights on digital twins, predictive modeling, and the future of bioprocessing provide a roadmap for simplifying complex bioprocess development. Remember, implementing these tools isn't just about cutting-edge technology, it's about delivering life-transforming therapies faster and more effectively. Do you have questions about implementing advanced sensors or modeling approaches in your own process? Or do you need help navigating the path from lab to commercial scale? If this is of interest, book a free call with me at BrühlmannConsulting.com, and together we can help you do biotech the smart way. Join us next time for more expert strategies to master bioprocess development with confidence. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.